It's been a while, I must admit, since I've been to church during Advent season. Couple years, to be sure. Throughout college, I often went to other denominations or really other religious services through the holidays, trying to learn what it was that made December so important to so many people. So when I read this gospel, I was a bit shocked to not hear the story of Jesus' birth and to start with Advent and what Christmas we all think about and Jesus being born in a manger, and instead getting Jesus telling us about the end times and about how things are going to be dark and be prepared for despair. It's not what you think when you hear the new year of the church or Advent. You don't think about the darkness. But that is where we are today. And so we must ask ourselves, how do we say hello to today, to this darkness? How do we live honestly in our own skins, in our own time, when there is war all around us, when there is suffering around us, when there is darkness in ourselves? And then again, how do we guard against this? We experience here that Jesus is challenging us to name this darkness, to welcome the darkness even. In his prophetic language, it sounds distressingly contemporary, as Jesus describes a world reeling in pain, roaring seas, distress among nations, people fainting in fear. Jesus says, when you see these things, don't turn away. Don't hide. Why? Why should we not hide? In truth, Jesus tells us because it's reality. Because we have to embrace reality and acknowledge that there is darkness among the light. We cannot have light without darkness, and we cannot have darkness without the light. And when we acknowledge the two together, when we acknowledge that there is suffering as well as hope, we experience the nearness of God. We experience Jesus, who is that hope in the season of Advent and the darkness that comes with Easter. I didn't grow up observing Advent as normal people did. I went to a very contemporary service growing up. My childhood church didn't really follow the year of the church as much. We had our times. But the lineup that I remember went straight from Thanksgiving turkeys and pumpkin pies to Christmas trees and jingle bells. There was no discussing what was to come. But as I move deeper into this liturgical tradition, as I become to understand more about different holidays and especially about Christmas in the church, I've come to love Advent as it is. Love it more than just the presents on Christmas Day. I love that the church begins its New Year's in days that are getting darker. The darkest day of the year has still yet to come. I love that the season rejects cheer for the first couple weeks. I love that the gospel gets us started this week with images of not twinkly stars and swaddling clothes, but of how reality really is. How reality is gorgeous and fragile and falling apart all around us. There aren't soothing, saccharine invitations to accept this. It's not something this week that we can shop for gifts for or sing carols about as much. But whether we like it or not, the invitations of Advent that it offers are often hard-edged. It's not for the faint of heart. They don't look pretty on greeting cards sometimes, but they are essential and life-giving. They help us to say hello to our world as it is. So here are some Advent invitations that I'm reflecting on through Advent. I know there are 5 and there's 4 weeks. It's fine. You can, a week after Christmas, you can think about it. The first week that I'm thinking about is the invitation to tell the truth. Advent is a brutally candid season. It calls for honesty, even when honesty leads us straight into lamentation, into pain. In Advent, we are invited to describe life on earth as it is. Not just the good, but also the bad. We are not called to mistakenly assume our religion requires to render it, but we are invited to shout forth our pain, shout forth our suffering, to draw large the startling figures of an apocalypse. We're asked to stop posturing and pretending, to come to the end of ourselves, and to get real. Advent reminds us that we are not called to escape, but we are called to courageously accept the truth, to courageously stand forth and expect the end. The next thing I invite to think about is the invitation to yearn. That is, to name the here of our desires without shame or reservation. Advent is a season when longing makes sense, when it's okay to say we're hungry, that we're thirsty and lonely and we need something to fill our hearts. Sometimes we sit in darkness, longing for light. We sit in exile, longing for a home. We sit with aching, empty arms, waiting for a cradle of life that is still unformed and still hidden. In Advent, our desire of God strains towards God's desire for us. Between the clinging and the yearning, we are unmade, remade, and unmade again. Next in Advent, there is the invitation to wait. During Advent, we live with a quiet anticipation of the not yet. I remember on Christmas mornings, we had a rule that you couldn't enter the living room until both of our parents were awake. In fact, my parents would wrap up the doorway to our living room so us kids could not see into the Christmas tree and all the presents. And as a kid, I remember 9 a.m. could not get around fast enough, and I thought that was so late for Christmas Day. And now I wake up at 11 a.m., maybe noon on Christmas Day. But there is still that waiting. You've got to wait for more. There's no easy task in the modern world that doesn't involve some kind of waiting. Our whole life is filled with waiting. The world speeds past us sometimes. In Advent, it reminds us that necessary things doesn't always speed past us. The child we wait for on Christmas Day grows in the deep darkness of the womb. In this season, we strive to find not perfection, but the possibility. We strive for waiting, for patience. Next, there's the invitation to notice, to attend, and to look. Look at the fig tree, Jesus says. Look at all the trees. Be attentive to the detail. Don't theologize. Don't reveal an abstraction. Don't assume that God is present only in creed or theory or in doctrine, but to look at the sprouting leaves. Look around you. Notice the changing sky. Attend to the movements of the earth and notice that God is there too, not just in four walls. Notice that God shows up in a teenager's womb. Notice that God can show up anywhere. The last invitation is to imagine. In Advent, we are called to hope creatively. We're called to imagine the story of Christ being born. We're called to hope with our imaginations, where we can hold in tension the grief of our circumstances and also the compassion of a Messiah who comes to save us all. With our imaginations, we can take the long view even as we dwell concretely in the here and now. With our imaginations, we can actually see God. So how do we say hello to here? How do we create all these invitations into one Advent being? We begin by admitting the truth. That first invitation. Invite to tell the truth. Advent invites us all to dwell in reality, to listen to the ocean waves heave against us, to feel the ground shake beneath us, and to understand that even when our hearts are gripped with fear, that there is something coming, that the light is there, that the light is at the end of the tunnel. We are to yearn and wait for it. There is something beautiful there, something that is world-saving, and it waits to be born on this Advent season. Amen.